Steven's irritation peaked upon discovering that his neighbor's semi-truck is once again obstructing his driveway. This deliberate act felt like pure spite, pushing Steven to his breaking point. Contemplating his next move, Steven began devising a solid plan. It wouldn't take long before he formulated a strategy. Rushing for work and consumed by rage, Steven repeatedly blared his horn, anticipating his neighbor's emergence to clear the obstructive truck. And much to Steven's dismay, there was no sign of his neighbor coming out of the house. Dealing with this so early in the morning was beyond frustrating for him, the very last thing he needed at that moment. Steven Adams hailed from Albuquerque, New Mexico. He maintained a small circle of close friends, valuing quality over quantity in his relationships. For Steven, life was about cherishing meaningful connections. He shared a 2-bedroom house in the amicable and tranquil Bear Canyon neighborhood with his girlfriend, Carly, whom he's been with for a year. In the neighborhood had always been characterized by kindness and friendliness. However, a shift occurred when Tim, their new neighbor, settled in next door. Tim Brown, a divorced man, relocated to Albuquerque with aspirations to launch his trucking business. The atmosphere changed drastically when he opted to operate his business from his residence. The typically serene street transformed into a bustling hub with the constant arrival and departure of Tim's vehicles. As time passed, neighbors began conversing over their fences, expressing their dissatisfaction with the changes that had befallen their once tranquil and idyllic neighborhood. One bright and sunny Friday morning, Steven was up and getting himself ready for a day of work. He loved Fridays and couldn't wait to finish so that he could enjoy a quiet weekend. However, as he stepped out of his front door, he was met with an unexpected sight. One of Tim's semi-trucks was blocking his driveway. Steven shook his head. What had possessed Tim to park this monstrosity right in front of his house? It was so long that it blocked the entrance to his house as well as the whole driveway. Is this guy for real? Steven muttered to himself. Surely Tim knew that this was the time that he would be leaving for work, yet he still parked the truck there. He marched over to Tim and knocked on his door. He could hear music blaring from inside. He started banging loudly on the door now, hoping that Tim would finally hear him. When Tim finally opened the door, he was dressed in a bathrobe and holding a frying pan. Top of the morning to yeah, neighbor? Want to join me for some breakfast? I'm making bacon, Tim offered. However, Steven was not amused. He tried really hard for Tim not to notice how annoyed he really was but failed miserably. Morning. Can I ask you to please move your semi from my driveway? I gotta get to work, and I'm already late as it is, Steven said, hoping that Tim would be apologetic for his mistake. However, Steven was in for a very difficult morning. Oh yeah, about that I was gonna come by and ask if I could park off there, but I got really busy. You see, I don't really have space to park it anywhere else, Tim replied nonchalantly. At that point, Steven was silently fuming. He just wanted to get to work. How did this guy not understand that? Okay, cool, but can you move it now so that I can pull my car out? Steven asked. He could see that Tim was going to be very difficult. Yeah, no can do, I'm afraid. My driver just left and I can't drive such a big semi myself, Tim responded. And Steven widened his eyes in disbelief. He had never heard anything like this before. Tim, you're costing me my job here and I'm losing time. What am I supposed to do now? Tim shrugged, still maintaining his nonchalant attitude. Sorry, man, can't help it. Maybe you should talk to your boss about flexible work hours or something. Not my problem, he replied, turning back toward his house as if dismissing the entire situation. Realizing that reasoning with Tim was futile, Steven decided to take matters into his own hands. He stormed back to his house, grabbed his phone, and dialed the local police. As he explained the situation, his frustration poured out and he pleaded for assistance. The police, understanding the urgency, promised to send an officer over to address the issue. Steven felt a slight sense of relief. Maybe the law would finally make Tim see reason. While waiting for the police, Steven confronted Tim once more. The tension escalated as both men stood their ground. Tim, still in his bathrobe, seemed unbothered while Steven's anger bubbled just beneath the surface. As the minutes passed, the standoff intensified. Steven couldn't believe the level of disrespect he was facing from a neighbor who seemed more interested in his own convenience than basic courtesy. Finally, the sound of sirens approached, signaling the arrival of the police. Officer Rodriguez, a stern-faced but composed officer, stepped out of the patrol car. He assessed the situation and immediately understood the severity of the issue. Arresting both men, Officer Rodriguez firmly stated, "This obstruction is a violation of city ordinances. You can't block someone's driveway, Mr. Brown. You need to move your truck immediately." Tim, however, remained defiant. "I can't move it right now. My driver left and I can't drive it myself," he argued, refusing to acknowledge the consequences of his actions. Officer Rodriguez wasn't swayed. "That's not my problem. You have a responsibility to your neighbors. If you can't move it, I'll have it towed and you'll be facing fines for the violation." As the officer radioed for a tow truck, Stephen couldn't help but feel a mix of satisfaction and frustration. The situation had escalated far beyond what he had anticipated, but justice was finally on his side. Officer Rodriguez, unmoved by Tim's pleas, watched as the tow truck pulled away with the obstructive semi. Stephen, feeling a surge of triumph, stared at Tim, who was now left to face the consequences of his inconsiderate actions. The other neighbors stepped out of their houses and watched as the huge semi-truck was being pulled away. Mrs. Thompson saw this as an opportunity to air her own grievances, and amidst the heated discussions, some neighbors suggested taking legal action against Tim to maintain the tranquility of their community. Stephen, initially hesitant about escalating the conflict further, felt compelled to support the idea. As news of the neighborhood dispute spread, local media outlets caught wind of the story. Reporters swarmed the quiet streets of Bear Canyon, interviewing residents and capturing the tension that had gripped the commuters amidst the media frenzy. A court date was set to address the legal actions proposed by the community. Tim, realizing the gravity of the situation, hired a lawyer to defend his case. The courtroom buzzed with tension as both parties presented their arguments. As the judge carefully listened to the grievances and considered the evidence, it became evident that Bear Canyon's tranquility hung in the balance. After weeks of legal battles and deliberations, the judge finally delivered the verdict. Tim Brown was ordered to relocate his trucking business to a commercial area, away from the residential neighborhood of Bear Canyon. While the decision was met with mixed emotions among the residents, it marked a significant victory for those who had fought to preserve the peace and quiet they once enjoyed.